Before there was NSYNC or Backstreet Boys, there was DuJour. Who are they? Well, they are your backdoor lover. And DuJour means that on this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Josie and the Pussycats. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me once again is my lovely wife, Bethany.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
I don't think they're going to respond.
No, I hear them. Hold on. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Okay.
All right. So, Bethany, this was a movie that Bethany immediately told me she wanted to do. And I had to do a little bit of research before we got started to make sure that it was going to be a show I could really give a show about, because I was not familiar with the comic. I knew they were a comic, but with Josie and the Pussycats, I knew nothing.
Well, see, I have never read the comic, but the cartoon used to come on Cartoon Network late at night, and when I was a kid, I just never slept. So I would stay up and I would watch those. And I remembered loving that. And then, of course, I was just obsessed with the movie, particularly the soundtrack when it came out. I was the perfect age.
Yeah, I don't know if I saw the movie until it was good and long out on DVD. And I may have even gotten it from the library. And that was how I saw it. Yeah, I mean, it was what it was. That's the way it was for me.
And now that you've seen it, don't you feel like you've missed several years of Josie and the Pussycat watching?
I do not. I am a little bit more interested in the comic book, though. He's
trying to make himself look cool. He's failing. I know him too well.
So let's get into the comic book itself. So the comic book was originally just titled She's Josie, and it was first published in February of 1963. They then changed it to just Josie, not just Josie, just the name Josie, in December of 1965. And it officially became Josie and the Pussycats in December of 1969. The last issue of the comic was published in October of 1982. However, the characters still exist in the Archie Comics, and there are one-shots of the characters that are still published today.
Right, and I know we haven't watched a lot of Riverdale, but they have also appeared on the show Riverdale. I know you're more talking about the comic, but
yeah, so the characters of Josie and the Pussycats are currently live action in the CW show Riverdale, and so even the characters still continue along with the Archie characters. But Josie and the Pussycats were created by cartoonist Dan DeCarlo, who actually once worked with Stan Lee in Marvel Comics. This was when he decided to go independent. He created a few characters, but Josie and the Pussycats got picked up by the Archie Comics. I thought it was kind of fun that he got the idea of Josie and the Pussycats when he saw his wife in a cat costume.
Oh. And
his wife is named Josie.
That's sexy.
Okay. So this movie does have two directors. They are Harry Elfont and Deborah Kaplan, who haven't directed an awful lot. Before this, though, they did direct the 90s teen comedy Can't Hardly Wait. But they are writers of several movies, including the wonderful A Very Brady sequel.
Oh, so good.
And The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas.
So they're quality entertainers is what you're trying to tell me.
Very much so. So that kind of gives you an idea, if you've never seen Josie and the Pussycats, of kind of where this movie is headed. They do, even though Josie and the Pussycats are from the 60s, 70s cartoon, they didn't go the route of the Brady movies where it was taking them kind of out of their time and putting them into modern time.
Right.
They updated everything. It was about the pop culture of today. Josie and the Pussycats were a modern group, modern band. They were modern. I don't know are they supposed to be teens?
I think they're supposed to be in their 20s.
Well, the actors were in their 20s. So
yeah, I mean, that's kind of can we go back just a second and talk about the technology in this movie because I was triggered by it.
How so?
It was just, oh my gosh, it took me to 2001. You know, it had the old cell phones, like their manager had that gigantic brick cell phone, and then Alan Cumming constantly pulling out his little flip phone, then the tube TV set up in the CD stores, the music stores.
The fact there was a music
store.
There
were music stores. Body glitter all over everything. Her Discman. I just, like, everything about it. It was, like, sense memory. Did you get any of that?
Yeah, I picked up on, this, so the movie was released in 2001, yes. I believe. And so, yeah, it was definitely of its time and for its time, and we'll definitely get into that a lot more later in the show. But let's go ahead and jump into the characters. Okay. Of course, you can't have Josie and the Pussycats without Josie herself.
Or Valerie.
Well, true. But, yeah, Josie McCoy, played by Rachel Lee Cook, straight off of her success with She's All That.
Another great movie. Does not hold up at all.
There's some in this movie that doesn't hold up either.
That's very accurate.
But even though Rachel Lee Cook is a phenomenal actress, she is not a singer.
Yes.
The singing voice of Josie is provided by Kate Hanley from the band Letters to Cleo. If you are unfamiliar with the band,
you were born in 2000 and above, because Letters to Cleo was just a super 90s everything.
And in terms of movies, they were actually the band that performs on the rooftop of the school in the movie 10 Things I Hate About You.
Love it.
Another very of the time teen comedy.
Another looking back on it makes you go, oh.
Now, even though Josie got her own comic in February of 1963, the character was actually introduced in Archie's Pals and Gals, number 23 in a year before, in December of 1962. Okay. Her last name in the comics actually changes around. It's McCoy in the movie, but in the comics, it's either Jones or James, depending on which comic you read. I don't know what the confusion was there, if it was just a typo at one point, but she's either Josie Jones or Josie James, but in the movie, she's Josie McCoy.
Well, okay, so my feelings on Josie in the movie. I love the character, and until they try to brainwash her at the end...
They succeed.
They do. Well, but not for long, not permanently. So anyways, as I was saying before you interrupted, Josie, she's just a good team player. Like, Valerie's already over there having these, like, doubts and feeling bad about herself, but none of that is actually coming from Josie. There's that moment where the three of them are walking into the club, or into the party, and they're all having different thoughts, and Josie's like, oh, they're looking at us, they think we don't belong here, and then Valerie's thinking, oh, they're all looking at Josie, they think I don't belong here, and then of course Melody's singing If You're Happy and You Know It, Clap Your Hands. I think it's kind of hard to discuss these characters without talking about them and how they interact with each other, especially the three.
Yeah, and as we get through the others, the three main characters and the three main actresses, you could tell there was an actual, like, chemistry, a friendship between the three, and they just enjoyed
such good chemistry
working with each other.
They seemed like real friends. Like, they would sit on each other's laps, and they were just all like friends do. They like leaning on each other, picking on each other, just that kind of thing. It felt real.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, moving on, we've got Melody. Melody Valentine, which again is a last name that was made for the movie. Okay. Played by Tara Reid. She clearly is the comic relief.
It's the best thing Tara Reid has ever done. Ever.
She was in Sharknado.
I repeat myself. This is the best thing Tara Reid has ever done.
Well, she made the character so well loved and all that in the Archie comics, whenever the character showed up again. They actually did give her the last name of Valentine. So Melody Valentine is now her name, even in the comic books. She's
so adorable. She's that, like, sweet friend that, I mean, obviously she's exaggerated. She's a cartoon character, pretty much. But she's that sweet friend that you have that's really well-meaning and always there for you and loving and doting and perceptive, but maybe not the smartest, but you couldn't imagine having them around without, like, you couldn't imagine not having them around.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she played the lovable ditz, I guess you would say, which, you had Gilligan on Gilligan's Island, and later, Amanda Seyfried would play that part in Mean Girls.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a very similar, and again, for these type of movies, definitely something you're going to see is that type of character.
Right.
Then to round out the Pussycats, we have Valerie Brown. Again, last name different for the movies. In the comic book, she's Valerie Smith, played by Rosario Dawson.
This was the first thing I had ever seen Rosario Dawson in.
Well, it was one of her first big movies. I don't know if she did anything major prior to this. I think she was in maybe some television shows and some smaller films. But this was kind of her breakout performance. Originally, people like Beyonce, Aaliyah, and even Lisa Left Eye Lobes all were considered for the role.
It's Lopez.
Sorry. And in the comics, the character is the songwriter. They don't really play with that in the movie.
They kind of mention it. Like, there's the point where at one point they're talking about, oh, well, we need to kind of work on the lyrics. And Josie keeps saying, well, what do you think, Val? Val, what's your opinion on it? And Valerie's too much in her head being all self-conscious to really acknowledge it. But I feel like there are a couple of points where they mention that they work as a team, but Valerie's the main one that writes the songs.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way it is in the comics. What I did find interesting was in the comics, she's the smart one. You got the ditzy one, then you got Josie, the main one, the talented one, and then Valerie, not to say they're not all talented, and then Valerie is kind of the smart one. She's the one always coming up with the ideas, and in the cartoon, she was kind of like the Velma of the group.
The one who said, okay, you guys, let's calm down for a second. Let's look at the facts.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you ever really watched the cartoon, but it had that very, like, Scooby-Doo feel. It was that Hanna-Barbera cartoon. And they had their cliche, they had their cookie-cutter format for just about all of their cartoons, where it was like, here is group. Group get into situation. Situation has to be figured out. There's something weird going on. They have to detective, problem solve, figure it out. End of show.
Yeah, which was pretty much how all cartoons.
There has to be one shot of a hallway 70s. Where they're all going in and out of different doors.
Yeah. But speaking of the cartoon, the character of Valerie was actually the first African-American female cartoon character that was on a regular animated television series.
That is really cool.
That's what I thought.
I didn't know that.
All right, moving on to, I'll go ahead and say, is one of Bethany's least favorite characters. Mm-hmm. And that is Alan M., played by Gabriel Mann in the movie. In the comics, he does have a last name. It is Alan M. Mayberry. And he was introduced...
so stupid!
He was introduced in August of 1969. Uh-huh. In the comics, he is, heavily built blonde folk singer. He acts as the band's roadie, which they do kind of play on in the movie when Alan gets to...
Adam 12.
Yeah. When Alan gets to travel with them, Josie says, well, I told them you were my guitar tech.
Yeah. Whatever that means.
Yeah.
He's just boring. Like, I think when they do the trampoline jump introduction of all the characters at the beginning, it says, like, Alan M., the sexiest guy in Riverdale. I'm like, really? even for like early 2000s standards, he wasn't the sexiest guy I've ever seen.
That's Jughead.
That's Jughead. Exactly. So anyways, he's just boring and he takes away from the plot, really. Like, we don't need that plot. You know what I mean? I feel like, what am I trying to say? So I feel if you had taken Alan X out of the...
Alan M.
Adam G. out of the movie. If you had taken him out of the movie, you could have focused more on, you know, character development for Melody and Valerie. You know what I mean? Because out of nowhere, Valerie starts feeling self-conscious. And it kind of, I don't know, it doesn't ring very honest, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and I just wish they had spent, like, the 10 minutes that they spent with Alan M. doing nothing on developing why the three women are struggling.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this movie is what it is. I wasn't going in expecting... I don't think people go in expecting this deep storyline with all of this dramatic exposition and thought and whatnot. It is a 2000s teen comedy. You gotta have a love interest. And
you don't, though.
But you did then. Again, like you talked about with the cartoons, there was this formula to it. There was a formula to these type of movies in the late 90s and early 2000s.
I get that, but I feel like the movie would have been perfect if you had left him out. Because, I mean, he just took away a lot from the movie. Like, anytime he was on screen, I was just like, nah, I'm gonna play on my phone now. I gotta check my email. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't care. Like, when she stood him up for his gig, did not care. Could not care less.
Yeah, I will say that I thought there would be a little bit more with the fact that his character was also kind of a struggling musician, and that they would maybe play with that, where Josie was trying to get him to open for them or something like that. I did think they could have played with that a little bit more.
Well, and then my thing too is it goes into this like painful stereotype that happens in a lot of movies that are focused on a female lead, where she gets involved in her work. It's something that she has been working towards. She and Valerie and Melody have I keep wanting to call her Harmony for some reason. But the Pussycats have been working really hard to get famous. Or not even famous, but just recognized. They're finally getting recognized, even though it's for nefarious reasons. And yeah, she's busy, and I'm so sorry that she can't, go out on a date with you, or can't stop everything she's doing to go to your gig when she's in the middle of about to open a concert.
Yeah, but that's the whole theme of the story of the movie, is because that's the whole thing with the Pussycats. Josie says it's friends before the band.
But it's friends, not random dude I have a crush on.
But okay. So moving on, we've got Alexander and Alexandra, which in the comics they are the Cabot siblings. I don't know if their last names mentioned in the movie ever.
I think it is during like I said, the trampoline introduction.
Yeah, where it shows their name. Yeah, I do think it is there. But Alexander Cabot is played by Paul Costanzo.
Okay.
I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. He is pretty much the band's self-appointed manager. You kind of assume he just took the opportunity himself, saw them perform there in Riverdale, and said, hey, I'm going to be your manager. In the comics, the character actually has a crush on Josie, and sometimes, for the sake of the story, also shows an interest in Melody. They don't really play on any of that in the movie. That, again, probably could have been something interesting with Alan and Alexander kind of both having their eye on Josie, but they decided not to go that route.
like I said, I've never read the comics. I enjoyed these characters in the movie, even though they really didn't play a part. They were a good comedic relief, especially Alexandra. I told you as it was coming up, because Laramy can tell you that I spent the whole movie either singing or quoting the movie. And I said, this is the best line in the whole movie. And they're on the airplane. And Alexander looks at Alexandra and he says, why are you even here? And very absent-mindedly, Missy Pyle says, I'm here because I was in the comic book.
Yeah, which I love that line. And as Bethany says, she is played by Missy Pyle. And even though Missy Pyle was only a couple of years older.
She looked so much older than everybody else.
Yeah, a lot of the cast was born either 75, 78, 79. Missy Pyle was born in 72. So she's a little bit older than the cast, but she really looked significantly older.
I think they kind of made her, especially her hair, because she has the same hair she does in the comic, which is just this white streak.
Yeah, she has the skunk hair, as it is mentioned in the movie. She does have that in the comic books. Again, playing off of the Alan M. stuff in the comics, Alexandra is actually attracted to Alan M., and she's jealous of Josie. And she's very much the mean girl to Josie, which they do play with a little bit. You know, Josie doesn't quite, or Alexandra doesn't quite understand how Josie's famous and whether all of this is real. So they do kind of play with that. What's fun is that in the comic books, Alexandra actually gets magical powers.
Oh, well, that they should have added into the movie.
Yeah, for a quick little side note, Archie Comics did have that before. Sabrina the Teenage Witch is actually from the universe of Archie as well. But it's kind of that same thing, like people may not remember that on Happy Days, that was where they introduced Mork, the alien, Robin Williams, which would later become the show Mork and Mindy. So they did play with magical powers in the Archie Comics, and Alexandra did develop these magical powers. She had this cat that as long as she was holding the cat, she had the magical abilities. It was a very short time back in 1969. It didn't last very long. But a very interesting thing is that Alexandra, they talk about her wanting to be in the band. Well, in the comics, she actually was. She was in the band before Valerie was introduced into the comics. So it was actually Josie, Melody, and Alexandra was in the band as their bassist. And then later Alexander recruits Valerie to then replace his sister, which of course leads to more of the the jealousy and all that Alexandra has for Josie.
Yeah. I have nothing to add to that.
The final characters are Wyatt Frame and Fiona. They are played brilliantly by Alan Cumming and Parker Posey.
Mwah.
They are not from the comics. They were created just for this movie. They are they're
perfection on screen.
They are the villain of the week. Looking at this in terms of a cartoon and all, but yeah, beautifully played. Both of them, Parker Posey especially.
She is
comedic.
A queen. She is fantastic. Her timing, her just subtle little facial expressions she'll make. I mean, I guess they're not all that subtle, but her facial expressions, the way she holds her body, and she wore that stupid little neck choker that had the feathers coming out of it that whipped everywhere.
Which you did see her sometimes react to the feathers. Also love the dress she wears at the end, which is just a bunch of her logos, just patches just attached to the dress. Not made into the dress. They were just attached to the dress.
And then Alan Cumming, I don't know if you have this in your notes later, but there's this one line that made me laugh so hard. And he said something like, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to make your friends from high school jealous. Sometimes you have to wait for your 10-year high school reunion to get that sort of glory. And then 3 years before this movie had come out was when he did Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion, which is where he really got popular. And I just, and it really, I did read it, that it was supposed to be a reference to that movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of
It's a very meta movie.
Yeah, nods and references. Even
Alan
the fact...
Cumming literally looks at camera and makes an evil face while he's doing something bad at one point.
Yeah, but yeah, the meta nature, which we'll get into a little bit more, was just very predominant in this film.
Can we talk about DuJour?
Sure. So,
in real life, DuJour means of the day, which is pretty appropriate considering that, you know, it's dealing with fads and what's popular that right now. So that's funny. But according to the movie, DuJour means hygiene, friendship, family, teamwork, seatbelts, and crash positions.
Yeah, it's great. Little moments there in that opening scene.
Those 4 guys have the most fun of everyone in that movie, and that's saying a lot. Because everybody in that movie knows what movie they're in, and they're all having a good time doing it.
Yeah, and all 4 of those guys are uncredited. They didn't receive any recognition for being in the film. Of course, we're talking about Seth Green, Breckenmeyer, Donald Faison, and then Alex something.
Some dude.
I know it's Alex.
He was in Can't Hardly Wait.
Yeah, that's
which
where
is
the
why he was in the movie.
But I honestly don't have it written down, and I can't remember his name, but I'm pretty sure it's Alex something. So no disrespect to you, buddy, but you just weren't popular enough for us to know you.
I just didn't know you. I'm so sorry.
Of course, Seth Green at the time, you know, doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer, kind of known for that. And then Breckenmeyer and Donald Faison were about 5 years off of doing Clueless.
Right.
So, you know, they were kind of big stars around the time as well.
All 4 of them were in Can't Hardly Wait, which was directed by the same people that directed this movie. And that is why they made it into this movie. I just adored Seth Green so much. So I remember being so excited when he was in this movie. I didn't really know the other 3.
Well, I like that Seth Green's character plays off of the making the face, which was something that boy bands were just notorious for. Really, any pop singers were notorious for. It was the pose and the face.
Little girl, beauty tips, face.
Yeah.
So good.
So yeah, fun thing. Just going back and watching the opening scene is really worth the view. Even if you're not interested in the rest of the movie.
Can we talk about Backdoor Lover?
Sure.
It's one of my favorite songs. And that has nothing to do with the movie. I just love that song. You made fun of me because I still knew the words to the song.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you knew the words to all the songs.
Yeah, I had the soundtrack as a kid. And so I listened to it constantly.
All right, so moving on into the moving panels. This was actually kind of hard to do because there really wasn't anything straight off the page. I did find it funny that in the movie Wyatt Frame, Alan Cummings' character actually says something about reading a comic, watching a cartoon, or going to a movie with the name Josie and the Pussycats, which of course is all of these. But as we talked about earlier, the movie primarily is more based off of the show and the way the characters kind of interacted with the show, where you had, as most cartoons
all
of the
Hanna-Barbera
of the 70s had, you had this band, Josie and the Pussycats. There's some villain, bad guy situation that they have to resolve in between concerts. So concert at the beginning, concert at the end, in the middle, hijinks.
At one point, there's a hallway. Everybody's running around.
Yeah, somebody sees something and what? You know, kind of situation and all that. Because
very Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, and that's what most of the cartoons back then were all associated with. So the comic, you really couldn't pull a lot from the comic. The show Riverdale, gets a little bit more closer to what Archie Comics and the Josie and the Pussycat comics did in terms of it was, although they went a little dark, but the comics really just dealt with Josie and the Pussycats performing their gigs and then just dealing with being a teenager.
Right.
It was just teenage life. You know, you had the love interests and you had the jealousy and you had just dealing with this and dealing with that. And so it works for a little comic book. Wouldn't really translate that well into a 1.5-hour movie. Right.
Well, what was I going to say? So apparently Archie Comics, they did not approve of this movie because it wasn't the wholesome image that Archie was going for at the time. Even though now they have the darker versions of Archie, they support Riverdale, which is much darker than the movie Josie and the Pussycats. You know, they released this movie with 2 different ratings. So there was a PG rating that removed all of the profanity and sexual innuendo. And then the PG-13 rating, which had a bit more of the bluer jokes. But still, Archie Comics wasn't happy with it. They asked that there be one scene to show that they were wholesome. And so they added the scene of them brushing their teeth.
Okay.
Isn't that weird?
It's extremely bizarre.
But that was their way of like saying, see, they're wholesome. They brush their teeth.
Okay. Yeah. Because that screams wholesome to me.
It does. I mean, villains don't brush their teeth. They don't care about dental hygiene.
Speaking of Riverdale, so they do say they are from Riverdale. So that is a connection to the comics there. It's the home of all the Archie characters and whatnot. In the comic book, it is just small town USA. There is no reference to where it is, kind of like Springfield for The Simpsons. We don't quite know where it is. But it's kind of funny. In the movie, we get to see there's this thing about their bus pass or whatever it is.
They are the only people that have more than one person on their bus pass picture.
Yeah, well, crazy enough, though, they are individual bus passes. It's not 3 of the duplicate ones. So when we see Valerie's at the beginning, it's got Valerie's name and address, and her zip code is 46528. Which, when you do a little research, you find out that would put Riverdale in Indiana. That makes sense.
Right.
That works. Indiana. That works. But then later at the end of the movie, what brings Josie back to realizing she's been brainwashed and all that is her seeing her bus pass. And she has the zip code of 99860.
Well, that's different.
That is a zip code in Mexico.
I thought they lived together.
So, yeah, not only is it weird that they've got different zip codes, but the fact that one of them is in Mexico.
Yeah, it's a thing. Sometimes that happens. Your roommate has their side of the room in Mexico.
Yeah.
From Indiana.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's fine.
It's a heck of
I'm not a geography teacher. I don't teach, but...
Yeah. But Indiana and Mexico, not close to each other.
No. Okay. Well... There you go. All
right, another thing to play off of the rating is Melody's sex appeal, which they do play off in the movie just a little bit, but in the comics, it is actually... So it's kind of funny that you would say that about the way they were portrayed, because in the comics, Melody has such a strong sex appeal that when male characters just see her, they instantly fall in love with her.
Right.
And just become bumbling idiots.
Well, Carson Daly fell so much in love with her, he and Tara Reid got engaged.
Yeah. So again, part of the meta aspect was the scene with Carson Daly, because at the time, Carson Daly...
They met doing this movie.
Really? I thought they were already together. Mm-mm. But yeah, Carson Daly and Tara Reid were a real-life couple, or became a real-life couple, so, kind of an interesting... little thing when you realize that watching the movie. And but
they got engaged, but that didn't work out.
No. But again, with her sex appeal, and they played with the ditziness, she was always oblivious in the comic books about that, the guys were tripping over things and whatnot, seeing her and whatnot. And they play with this at the beginning when she's holding the signs. I'm not going to exactly say what the sign implies to say. Honk if you love
Pussycats.
But it causes a car wreck, and she is aware that the car wreck is happening, but you can tell she doesn't know why. Like, she doesn't know what she did to make the car wreck happen. So they do kind of play with that a little bit with that. But again, you had to have that character in the cartoons and in the comics. You know, she was the attractive one and all that. So we have the same thing here. All right, so let's just talk about the movie itself, since there's not really a lot of comic book things to talk about.
Yay!
The movie wasn't a success when it initially came out. It got more of a cult following as the years went on. The soundtrack became a bigger thing, and when they decided to re-release the soundtrack, the movie got a little bit more momentum again. I enjoy it for the satire that it is. I do think it was ahead of its time, though.
It's so, yeah, it definitely is. And I think it also suffered from the fact that the audience that it was aimed towards didn't make sense for the content that was in it. Like, it was kind of aimed towards my age at the time, which was like 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. But in reality, like, the content of it's way over their head.
Yeah, because you probably, when you saw this at the age of 12, you wouldn't have picked up on even though it wasn't subtle.
Government mind control.
Well, not just that, but the product placement.
Right.
That was all over the movie. So, looking it up on IMDb, I found out that it stated that 73 companies their logo or product is shown, and this was done completely without any payment.
Well, because it wouldn't make sense. Like, it would be a little hypocritical to do so. Because
I think some of it was hypocritical anyway, but we'll get to that later.
Well, we get into the fact that the whole movie is making fun of the fact that, you know, we're constantly trying to sell people things. Movies are always trying to sell you things. And
just like this one.
Shush. What did they try to sell you?
The soundtrack.
Yeah, but that was quality music right there. But, so in the first, like, moment of the movie, when it's DuJour, they do a little, it's very reminiscent of a Backstreet Boys music video. Mm. Where they're out there with a bunch of adoring fans, and then they're singing and kind of doing, like, getting
at
in
the airplane
camera.
Hangar.
Yeah, at the hangar. And then they get on the airplane, and it is an airplane sponsored by Target. And you see in just that moment, inside the plane, there are ads for Target, Bounce, Ivory Soap, Coke, 17 Magazine, Cheer, Dawn, and Crest.
Yeah, and I mean, then later when they're in the hotel, I think Valerie's room is entirely Revlon.
Yeah.
And Melody's room is McDonald's.
Yeah, she's
which
just
made
got
no
McDonald's
sense
everywhere. Well, she's a vegetarian, but the song made her want a Big Mac.
Yeah, and I love that she showers with what is clearly just a plush doll of a thing of fries. Yeah. But yeah, and so that is all over the place. They go into the bathroom and the walls lined with Starbucks logos. Right. There's something everywhere. Everywhere you see there.
Every scene
logos.
there is something. There's this big fight scene at the end, and Melody is doing like karate, fighting these people, and there's just a big Advil logo on the floor. For no reason. Yeah,
well, most of these logos were there for no reason. But again, going into the satire, it not only was going into the product placement and the commercialism, but just the, like you talked about with the name DuJour, it was the endless cycle of boy bands and female pop stars. You know, and the ones you'd remember, like Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, Britney Spears, and Christina Aguilera, which they have cardboard cutouts of in the TRL set. But then also the ones you would forget about, like O-Town.
Right.
Or Willa Ford. You know, that was around that time. And it was just that constant, just here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. And that's what the whole premise of this is, you know, okay, well, we've got DuJour, but once we're done with them, we get rid of them, move on to the next group.
And then I really loved the moment. This hit me hard, was when they said, well, like, what happens to these bands? What happens if they figure it out? And it's like, we have a whole television program to explain to people what happened to these people. And it's VH1 behind the music.
Yeah. I also love that the few times where Alan Cummings' character thinks they're about to figure it out, he goes ahead and pops his phone out, but then he realizes they haven't figured it out, and so he lets it go. There's the time where they're on the plane, and he goes up to the cockpit, and the pilot almost immediately gets ready to abandon, and he goes, no, we're good. We're good. So yeah, I love those aspects of it. So overall, it's a fun movie. I'm not going to lie. It's a fun movie. We got to watch it with our kids tonight, and it was so much fun watching my daughter get into it. Of course, like me when I first watched it, the content of what's going on in the movie really going over her head. But the music is so much fun, and it's colorful, and, you know, it's pretty people wearing pretty clothes. It really appeals to a very young audience, even though the subject matter is more for people our age. Yeah, but again, like you said, a lot of the subject matter is so deep in it that, you know, a younger crowd, which is where this movie kind of falters a little bit, don't pick up on it. Right. And so where the audience for this movie really is kind of this mixed area. So that's again where I'm saying when the movie originally came out, it wasn't that successful. Then when that group who just fell in love with the music and loved it for what you're talking about, when they got older and revisited it, they then understood it. Right. And it became hilarious. Yeah. I wouldn't call it hilarious, but I had so many belly chuckles watching this movie. I think we're getting into our final segment already, kind of getting an idea of what our final decisions are. Remember, here on Moving Panels, we break that down into how you would treat a comic book. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. I kind of have a feeling where you're going with this, Bethany, but go ahead, tell us how much you would bag it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy the most expensive bag. It's going to be it's going to be lined with gold. I'm going to bag it that way. Then I'm going to frame it. And then I'm going to... If it's lined with gold, you're not going to be able to see it. To protect it, Laramy. And then I'm going to take that framed comic that I've bagged that is lined with gold. And I'm going to donate it to the Smithsonian so that they can display it proudly. What is this? It's a gold rectangle in a frame. No. The size. No, you can still see. We've lost her. No. So in my mind, it's a bag that, like, it's lined. Like it's not edged? Edged. Thank you. No, it's edged with gold. It's got a gold trim. And framed in a very nice... Is it a gold frame? Oh, it should be. With diamonds encrusted. And then, like I said, donated to the Smithsonian so that they can proudly display this movie. And what would you like to give it, Laramy? The same? The same. No. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's been a lovely... I do not. It's a stack it. No. For me. Oh, you're stacking your copy so that I can continue watching it since my copies. He's such a good husband. But no, as I kind of alluded to already, my problem with the movie is that it is what it is making fun of. And so, again, it was a movie of the time. You had the young, attractive people. in a highly energized movie. You had all the hijinks that ensued. As far as your stars go, you had 2 fresh, new, talented female actors. And then there was Tara Reid.
Tara Reid was very popular at the time, and nobody knew quite how problematic she was yet.
But also, Tara Reid was Tara Reid. Like, no matter what Tara Reid was in, it was the same.
She had just done American Pie.
Which she played the same character.
No, she didn't.
Yeah, pretty much.
She wasn't. No, because if you remember, her character on American Pie was smart.
No, that's not what I see when I see Tara Reid.
Well, you know, no offense to Tara Reid. I know you listen. I know you give us 5 stars every time, even though it doesn't count after you've done it the first time. But we very much love and respect you in this movie.
But the other reason why I got it as a stack it is, again, with even the product placement. It may have been intended as a parody, but it was still product placement. Like, if maybe they had created fake companies.
Yeah.
And they had a way of doing it with these fake companies that made it more of a parody. But them trying to do a parody, it was product placement. It was exactly what it was. And we talked about the music earlier, and we talked about the meta aspect, and that was great and all, but the movie is still doing what they were trying to do. It was a movie that was made to sell tickets and to sell that soundtrack. And although it didn't succeed as much with selling the tickets, the soundtrack was a huge hit.
I still have it somewhere. It's still in here somewhere.
So I don't doubt that at all. And like I said, when they re-released it several years ago, or several years later, it was actually just a few years ago, I think, and they finally released it on vinyl, because vinyl made the big comeback. It was huge again. And to me, again, it's that consumerism, because you're talking about getting a soundtrack featuring all of these songs that aren't even sung by the actors.
No, but they're very good songs.
And I won't deny that. They are catchy songs. When we went back to rewatch this movie, the song 3 Small Words, I actually kind of knew the tune. I didn't really know many of the words, but I kind of knew the tune. Like it was something that I remembered and recalled, even though I've only seen this movie a couple of times. So I do agree with that.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, but that's okay. We can still stay married.
No, well, that's fine. So Bethany's got to bag it. I got to stack it. That's where we stand on this. You can, of course, make your own decision with Josie and the Pussycats. I do love that it is a comic book movie that is in that same vein of like the Scooby-Doo live action movie, and where it knows what it is. Right. And it's not trying to take anything too seriously. It is being campy. It is being funny. I do enjoy it for that.
It embrace it. That's one of the things I really do. In earnest, I enjoy. I know we've moved on, but I'm going back. In earnest, I really do enjoy, because it seems like everyone in that movie is having a blast.
No, I agree.
They know what movie they're making, and they're enjoying it. They're having fun. Nobody's taking it too seriously. They all just seem to be really enjoying it. Yeah. And I think this is the best we've ever seen of everyone in this movie.
Really?
Including Rosario Dawson.
I was going to say, Rosario Dawson did a lot of stuff after that.
Okay, fine.
And is still doing some awesome stuff. So,
fine.
But
definitely of Tara Reid.
Well, I may agree with you on that one. But we'll end this here. Go out and rewatch this and reminisce of what the late 90s, early 2000s were like if you were a child or a teenager around that time.
Oh, will you reminisce? It's triggering.
Yeah. But enjoy it for what it is. I will say it right now. I do think it's better than the show Riverdale. So it is probably the best adaptation of Archie in live action form to date so far.
Accurate.
So go ahead and give it a try. Thank you again, Bethany, for joining me.
You're welcome. We're going to go upstairs and rewatch it. Is that what you just said?
I do not think so.
No, you edited it out. I saw you do it.
I think we are good for at least a few months before we sit and watch it again.
We can listen to the soundtrack as we fall asleep.
That's not something I would want to fall asleep to. Alright, well, thanks everybody for Moving Panels. I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Hello movie viewers and fellow movie lovers. My name is Tim Williams and I'm the creator and host of Movie Views Presents the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. See, I love the 80s and I have a great appreciation and nostalgic passion for the classic 80s flicks that birthed my love for movies and ultimately helped shape my childhood. On each episode, I'll discuss, with a special guest co-host of course, a different film from the 1980s. We'll share memories, favorite characters, iconic scenes, and even share some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. We'll discuss famous blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Coming to America, Ghostbusters, Dirty Dancing, Top Gun, Die Hard, and many, many more. As well as some other cult classics and even lesser-known flicks we discovered on cable TV or the now-defunct video rental stores. Remember those? No matter what 80s flick we choose to talk about, we'll always have a good time, so come and check us out. You can find the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast on major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss a single episode. Once again, I'm Tim Williams, and I hope you'll join me for the next 80s Flick Flashback.